Hey there, and welcome back. I hope that you are ready to dive into a very exciting topic. Now, before we jump in, I just want to warn you that in this video, I'm going to use what some would consider to be a bad word. Now, in my defense, I will say that it wasn't a bad word until the 20th century, and that's when it became taboo. Okay, so all caveats aside, let's dive in. Okay, so this word that became off limits in the 20th century is the word beauty. Now, maybe some of you didn't realize that it was so taboo, but in the 20th century, for the great portion of the 20th century, the art world shunned the B word. And in my experiences, I've actually found that it's still a word you have to be careful with in certain contemporary art circles. So why is this? What's the beef with beauty, the word beauty, and what happened to it in the 20th century? Well, let's take a look. Okay. So I've got this long French name. Take a look. Do you recognize it? And don't be embarrassed if you don't. In fact, most people I ask have no clue who this Bouguereau is. And I think it's interesting because he was actually one of the most famous and beloved artists of the latter half of the 19th century. He won all the honors and accolades. He was the quintessential painter of his time. So here's a small sampling of his work. He was an academic artist, and he created these realistic paintings of these classical subjects, emphasizing the human body and upholding these Western ideals of beauty, form, and composition. But it's right around this time in history when you see Western civilization take a turn. You see, when Bouguereau was painting these beautiful scenes from mythology in his studio, outside his window there were factories going up, and Europe was smack dab in the middle of the Industrial Revolution. This was a time when cities began to explode, and with the factories came these poor working conditions and this growth of poverty. And so you have this rising generation of artists who are looking at the beautiful and idealistic forms of Bouguereau, and they say, but that's not truthful, that's not our world. We don't see angels floating about, and we see men on the side of the road wearing rags and doing back-breaking labor. We look out and we see beggars with broken noses. We see depressed, lonely people of the middle class sitting by themselves in cafes and drowning away their sorrows. So their biggest beef with Bouguereau's beautiful scenes was that it wasn't truthful. And so these artists emerge onto the scene, each striving in their own way to create forms that can speak more truthfully into their human experience. Some artists like the realists and the impressionists, they aim to replicate the reality of what they saw in front of them. But then in the post-impressionist period, artists like Vincent van Gogh took the quest for truth a step farther. When Van Gogh painted scenes like Night Cafe, instead of merely replicating its surface appearance, he instead brought in distortion and clashing colors. And he did this to show the reality of the tensions and isolation that he could feel in the space. In fact, he said, I want to paint incorrectly so that my untruth becomes more truthful than the literal truth. So wrap your head around that. He saw that there's more to communicate than just surface appearances. And he wanted to show the realities underlying his experience of something, and so he brought in distortion in order to get to the harsh realities of his experiences. And then artists of the 20th century, they continued to use distortion as a way of communicating the tension and the terror of the modern world. Here's Picasso's famous work, Guernica, which was in response to the horrific event of the bombing of the city of Guernica. Do you see how Picasso powerfully utilizes the distorted and what some might even say ugly forms in order to speak into the truthful realities of this horrific experience? And this use of distortion or ugliness for expressive purposes is not a modern idea. This can be seen throughout all of art history. But as you start looking at the dominant forms that emerge in the 20th century, you can see a noticeable break from the tradition and the classical ideals, and the human body becomes more distorted in order to express the angst of the modern world. Here are some raw expressions by Jean Dubuffet and Francis Bacon. And here's some work by Millie Brown. So these works, they illustrate how this aim for beauty really lost traction with the modern artists. And you see it almost abandoned altogether by many artists. Another thing you see in modern and contemporary art is the dismantling of spiritual significance when it comes to things like sex. Sex is often trivialized and made impersonal. And these graphic expressions really speak bluntly into the reality of this 20th century mindset as you see it permeated throughout artistic imagery. And I know some of those images were graphic, but I just wanted to kind of illustrate how you see this kind of breaking away from beauty. And you see this in modern and contemporary art. And I think it's largely due to the collapse of this historical foundations of meaning and value and truth, all of which were dismantled in the 20th century. You see, when Nietzsche declared God is dead, you immediately see the reverberations like trickle across all of the art world, and you see this abandonment of beauty. And that's because when you rip away the foundation of any kind of capital T truth, then there is no ultimate thing in which you strive for. And beauty, truth, meaning, it all becomes arbitrary, and you certainly see how this plays out in structuralism, post-structuralism, and deconstructionism. But the art world is currently divided on this issue, and not everyone is on board with this modern, nihilistic kind of posture towards beauty. Dave Hickey is a contemporary art critic who made a lot of waves in 1993 when he came out with his controversial book, Invisible Dragon, which he calls the contemporary art world to reconsider the B word, to reconsider beauty. In this book, Hickey uses art history to point to the power of images when they are grounded in visual pleasure. And then he uses examples from contemporary art to demonstrate this power and to bridge this gap. So beauty is making a comeback, and people are re-examining its relationship with art. And it seems that despite modernism's best efforts at cutting ties with ultimate standards, beauty cannot be untethered from art after all. And personally, I don't think it should. And for me, there's something about beauty that keeps me coming back. I would even say it's the reason that I create, because every time I sit down to make something, I feel like I'm chasing something, something that is of ultimate significance. And it doesn't matter what I'm doing. If I'm drawing or painting or designing something on the computer, it feels like there are these invisible solutions or these ideal forms somewhere at the end of the tunnel, and it's my job in the creative process to chase it down. In fact, the very act of creating, the process of trying and failing, then trying and succeeding, this all points to the notion of beauty in some way. So why is this? Why do we aim for these ultimate or ideal visual forms? What is it that keeps artists chasing after it, year after year, century after century, millennia after millennia? there's something about beauty that points beyond itself. It seems tied to the sacred. And when we experience this transcendence, or when we experience beauty in art or in song or in film, it awakens us to a higher reality that becomes difficult to deny. That's why Plato said that beauty is a pointer, and it's a pointer to the ultimate reality. In fact, philosophers like Plato listed beauty among the three transcendentals, along with truth and goodness. The three transcendentals are these core properties of being that represent all of humanity's ideal strivings. So truth, which we often seek through science and knowledge, beauty, which of course we seek through art, and goodness, which we seek through morality and religion. So these are all facets of being that seem to point to some kind of ultimate or ideal reality. And it seems that these transcendentals have been stitched into the fabric of our souls. We are wired to long for truth and beauty and goodness. Now I know that some people have suffered the abuses of religion, and so in turn they end up throwing away the divine baby with the bathwater. But I'll tell you right now that I believe in a perfect higher power, because it's the only thing that makes sense of the desires that I feel and the longings that I feel for truth, justice, meaning, morality, goodness. I recognize that these things exist, and I realize that my desires for these things, they have to come from somewhere. And that's why if you deny God, then you have to deny truth, goodness, and beauty, because without a higher power, then you don't have anything of substance that's grounding these ideas or gives meaning into these desires for these things. And personally, as a follower of Christ, I would say to the church that it's so important that we don't diminish the need or the role of beauty. And that's because if beauty is a characteristic of God and a pointer to his supreme essence, we need to strive for it and use it to best reflect his glory. But there are some objections to beauty, and some important objections that we need to tackle if we are to insist on beauty's importance. The first objection that people often raise is the fact that there seems to be an element of subjectivity to it. And people will say, okay, yeah, I like beauty, but I'm not going to put it on par with truth or goodness, because isn't beauty just merely subjective? And before we dive too far into this, let's just go ahead and unpack briefly what we mean when we use these terms subjective versus objective. Okay, so if this guy were to say, I love strawberry ice cream, it's the best. That's a subjective statement. A statement of taste, because the preference lies in the subject or in the man. It's a true statement for the subject, but it may not be true for other subjects. Now, the statement, this is strawberry ice cream, is an objective statement. It's a statement or a fact about the object. And because it's about the object, we would call it objective. And therefore, it's true for everyone. Okay, so now that we've defined our terms, let's take a look at David Hume. Hume was an incredibly influential philosopher of the 18th century, and he spent quite a bit of time pondering beauty. And he came to see beauty as being more subjective, a matter of taste. Some people are attracted to this, other people are attracted to that. He said beauty has no quality in things themselves. Okay, do you see what he said there? He said that beauty cannot be located in the object. He goes on to say, it exists merely in the mind which contemplates them. And each mind perceives a different beauty. One person may even perceive deformity, where another is sensible beauty. Okay, so for Hume, beauty can't be located in the object. It merely exists in the subject or in the eye of the beholder. So what do you think about that? Is beauty subjective? Is it merely in the eye of the beholder? Let's consider that. Think about things like taste. We certainly see how everyone seems to have different tastes for music and movies and art. And so in the face of all these preferences, we can't deny that there seems to be a subjective aspect of all of it. So that begs the question, is there any underlying ideal or anything objective when it comes to beauty? And if not, how can we even have art contests or awards, scholarships, grants, if beauty is merely in the eye of the beholder? And you see how this gets a little tricky. So here's what Hume says. Hume says, okay, it's in the eye of the beholder, it's a matter of taste, but there are some who have better taste than others. So for Hume, there are some individuals who make these ideal critics or who have better judgment. And I've listed here the different qualities that make up Hume's ideal critics. So first, do they have a delicacy of taste? Do they notice things? Pay attention to details? Hume saw that there are some individuals in society that are more keen on this than others. Second, do they have more practice than others? There's an expertise that comes with practice. And so for Hume, the more experience you have, the better of a critic you'll be. Third, can they make comparisons? Have they been exposed to a lot of art? This is why the more you become a student of your field and the more art history you learn, the more resources you have to make comparisons. Now, fourth, what about their prejudice? Have they removed their personal values? And fifth, do they have a good sense? And are they aware of themes of art and what it's trying to get across? All right, so all of these things are characteristics of people that Hume believes have good taste. And so these would be the people that you would want to learn from and the people that would have more weight to throw around when it comes to evaluating art. And I think all of these are good reasons to answer the question that people often raise, should I go to art school? If art is this subjective thing, what makes one person's opinion more valid than another person's? So to Hume, there are individuals who have experience, they've developed their taste, and you can learn a lot from their assessment. But I still think it's a valid question, especially if you think that beauty is merely in the eye of the beholder. Because think about it. If beauty is ultimately just a subjective thing, a matter of taste, and you can't point to it in the object, then just what is it that we're chasing after in art school? If we're not seeking to refine and develop and improve one's ability, then what are we doing? In fact, even using words like refine or develop and improve, all these words indicate that there's some kind of objective ideal in which you're moving toward. One could even say that there could be no ideal critic for Hume if there didn't exist an ideal or the notion of objectivity with beauty. So this is tough, right? On one hand, we can see that beauty involves taste and preferences and subjectivity, and so there's a squishiness to that. But then on the other hand, and really speaking as an artist, I can also see how there seems to be some type of element of objectivity to beauty as well, and this objective nature that allows me to refine and develop and strengthen my designs to where I can manipulate the elements and principles of art to express myself more effectively and powerfully. And so, we're left in this paradox of subjectivity and objectivity and how beauty seems to contain both. And so this paradox of beauty is going to be something that other philosophers will wrestle with as well. And in fact, next time we'll take a look at Immanuel Kant, who is another 18th century philosopher that explores beauty and is very influential. And so next time we're going to see what he has to say about this fascinating topic. All right. So thanks for your attention, and we'll see you then.